Il a fait référence à l'amendement successif. Parce que c'est dans l'amendement successif qu'on mentionne qu'il y a beaucoup de femmes, des enfants. C'est le 10, c'est pas le 9.
Talking about Amendment 10 right now.
Ah, bon.
It was 9. Okay, yeah, okay, sorry. Yeah, my mistake. Okay, right. Okay, Amendment 9. Yeah, we propose to insert the word civilian instead of the word lives, just to underline that so many civilian lives were lost in Gaza. Thank you.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I shall now, I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 9 is rejected.
Ms. Selleck has already spoken on number 10.
So,
Selleck.
Ms. Salik has already spoken on Amendment 10. So, does anyone wish to speak against the amendment?
No. Opinion of the committee.
What is the opinion of the committee? The committee has supported the amendment.
Donc, la commission a soutenu cet amendement à une grande majorité.
I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 10 is agreed. I call Mr. Mutka to support Amendment 17. You have 30 seconds.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Alors l'amendement tend à préciser le terme déplacement massif. Le 4 décembre 2023, l'ONU, les Nations Unies, l'institution sur laquelle on se base pour beaucoup de nos expertises dans cette Assemblée, parlait de 85% de personnes à Gaza déplacées. Pourquoi ne pas donner ce chiffre qui est celui de l'ONU de 85%? Je vous remercie.
Does anyone else wishes to support this amendment? Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Lord Blancatra, you have the floor.
Yes, I think the current terminology is correct. It is massive displacement, and I don't think we entirely trust the 85% figure. And I don't think this organisation should tie ourselves to a specific figure when it may be 90%, 70%, 65%. Massive displacement, I think, described it accurately, and that was the view of the committee, if I recall.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 17 is rejected. I call Mr. Mutka to support Amendment 18. You have 30 seconds.
Si, alors cet amendement a deux buts. Le premier a été rappelé par, je l'ai dit précédemment, sur le déplacement, certes massif, mais quantifié par l'ONU des personnes à Gaza. Et le deuxième, je voulais intégrer le mot disproportion dans l'amendement. En fait, à juste titre, et je le ferai toute ma vie, on condamne les horreurs terroristes du Hamas et on exprime une tristesse par rapport au nombre de morts palestiniens. Je pense qu'on doit pouvoir condamner ensemble la disproportion de la réponse israélienne à l'attaque, malheureusement contre des civils qui ne sont pas responsables de l'attaque du Hamas du 7 octobre. Je vous remercie.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Lord Blancatra, you have the floor.
The trouble with this amendment is it removes the responsibility of Hamas for starting the war and causing the casualties in the first place. If Hamas had not embedded themselves in hospitals and in the tunnels and the civilian population, Israel would not have attacked them.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 18 is rejected. I call Ms. Salik to support Amendment 11. You have 30 seconds.
Colleagues, if human rights are to be truly defended, it is imperative to condemn the disproportionate and indiscriminate attacks on Gaza, which have resulted in a staggering number of civilian deaths. To do otherwise would be inconsistent with international law, international values, the moral obligations of this assembly, and it would be hypocritical. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment?
Mr. Goncharenko.
I call Mr. Goncharenko to speak against the amendment.
Thank you. It's again trying to put the responsibility on the side which protects itself. We need to be frank. Hamas attacked, and the Israeli side is trying to eliminate terrorists who made a massacre and to save the hostages. So I am completely against adding of these words, because we are speaking, there is a huge tragedy of Palestinian people, but we need to say who is responsible for what's going on now in Middle East. Thank you very much.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed.
Rejected.
Amendment 11 is rejected. I call Mr. Mutka to support Amendment 19. You have 30 seconds.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Je reviens avec cette précision de 85%. Alors par rapport, ça me permet d'argumenter par rapport à un autre argument qui a été donné. Je relisais d'autres rapports qu'on a fait sur d'autres sujets, l'Ukraine, l'Arménie, toutes ces horreurs que notre continent connaisse. Et pourtant là, on exprime un chiffre très clair, quantitatif. Et donc je me demande pourquoi, quand c'est les Palestiniens qui sont obligés de se déplacer, on ne peut pas donner le chiffre qui montre la réalité de l'horreur de leur vie, à savoir, je le redis, 85% de la population, 1,9 million de pourcents sur 2,3 millions de pourcents qui sont obligés de se déplacer aujourd'hui à Gaza en raison des bombardements.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Yes, dear colleague, you have the floor.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente. Je crois qu'il est temps de pouvoir dire dans cet hémicycle que nous avons compris quelle était la manœuvre dans les amendements successifs déposés par l'extrême gauche ici. Il s'agit d'une complaisance pure et simple envers les actes terroristes qui sont menés par le Hamas. Nous nous opposerons évidemment à ces séries d'amendements qui cherchent à relativiser les actions d'un groupe terroriste, et il faut bien le redire dans cet hémicycle. Je vous remercie.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 19 is rejected. I call Mr. Mutka to support Amendment 20. You have 30 seconds.
Merci, chers collègues. Cet amendement veut insérer la réalité qu'est la réalité de famine. Et comme j'ai encore 20 secondes, je vais répondre à mon collègue précédent. Alors d'abord, je ne suis pas d'extrême gauche. Je suis de gauche, certes, mais pas d'extrême gauche. Par ailleurs, monsieur, je suis progressiste, athée et homosexuel. Tout m'oppose au Hamas, peut-être plus que vous. Tout m'oppose dans ma vie au Hamas. Et toute ma vie, je me battrai contre l'obscurantisme, qu'il soit islamiste ou d'extrême droite. Je vous remercie.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Lord Blancatra, you have the floor.
Thank you. I make it clear I'm opposing the amendment of Mr. Mouton's sexual preferences and his lifestyle and his life views, which I deeply respect. I oppose it because the wording from Mr. Fassino, I think, is well balanced and sensible. It's balanced. Whereas the amendment suggested by Mr. Mutkan is again putting the responsibility onto Israel, I think unfairly, and because there would not be a humanitarian crisis in Gaza if Hamas, living in Gaza, had not attacked Israel and started a war in the first place.
The committee rejected the amendment. Yes, please, you have the floor.
Je condamne fermement les propos de Lord Blancatra qui était purement homophobe et qui a fait référence à la vie sexuelle d'un de mes collègues. C'est honte à vous.
This is not a point of order. The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 20 is rejected, sorry. I call Ms. Selig to support Amendment 12. You have 30 seconds.
Dear colleagues, it's important to remember that the border crossings are largely shut down by the Israeli government. The Israeli government itself is responsible for the emergence of the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. The amendment is just to state this fact clearly. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment?
Goncharenko.
Mr. Goncharenko, you have the floor. You have 30 seconds.
Dear colleagues, I want to address to you. We're speaking now about huge tragedy. And I don't think that what's going on now in the Assembly is something good looking. Really, it's a tragedy. But in any tragedy, there are those who are guilty in it. And I don't know who we should be after what had happened on October 7, then trying not to recognize the fact that Hamas are terrorists, and they made from Gaza their fortress, unfortunately. That's the problem. So I just want to address all of you, because we're speaking about human lives. Please, let us be very, very patient also to one another. And I'm against this amendment, because it's saying about illegal things from Israeli side. But we would not say this because Israel is defending himself after what had happened on October 7th. We shouldn't forget it. Thank you.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 12 is rejected. I call Mr. Mutka to support Amendment 21. You have 30 seconds.
Oui, en effet, je pense qu'il faut un maximum de sérénité malgré nos opinions différentes. Je remercie le débat sur une part de mon identité. Je pense que mon intention était de dire que quelle que soit notre origine, quelle que soit notre sexualité, quelle que soit notre vie, on doit se retrouver ici en raison des droits humains. Et c'était ça mon propos, monsieur, en aucun cas autre chose. Et d'ailleurs, on doit aussi être précis. Le texte parle de centaines de personnes arrêtées pour des raisons de sécurité. Or, le chiffre maintenant, il est de 5000. Il y a 5000 personnes arrêtées. Donc, je propose de remplacer ça par des milliers. Et ils ne sont pas tous arrêtés pour des raisons de sécurité. Je rappelle que 5000 personnes sont en détention aujourd'hui pour des raisons politiques aussi en Israël.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Yes, you have the floor.
It's easy.
Sorry,
because it's completely lie.
I'm sorry.
Like any other lies that we heard today.
I'm sorry. You don't have you don't have the status that allows you to speak against.
Okay, so you know some.
Sorry, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Does anyone wish to speak against?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, please. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. You said there are all political prisoners, but that's not true. They are in prison because there is a reason, and I want to remind you that Israel has a rule of law. If they are in prison for unjustified reasons, they will be released by a judge. It's not like in Hamas, a terrorist organization. We have a democratic state in Israel, and it's an unfounded change you want to make to this report, and I kindly ask you to reject it. Thank you.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The amendment 21 is rejected. I call Ms. Silik to support Amendment 13. You have 30 seconds, sorry.
Sorry.
Ms. Silik, you have the floor to support the amendment. Ms. Silik, are you wishing to support the amendment?
The Palestinian people in Gaza are trying to survive in desperate and catastrophic conditions. deprived of their most essential and basic needs. Their situation is rapidly deteriorating, placing them on the brink of famine, starvation, and exposing them to life-threatening diseases. Urgent action is needed to alleviate these conditions, and this is what this amendment is about. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? What is the opinion of the committee?
Madame la Présidente, la Commission a soutenu cet amendement à une majorité.
I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 13 is agreed. Amendment 22. I call Mr. Mitkan to support Amendment 22. You have 30 seconds.
Merci Madame la Présidente. Le rapport veut rappeler une position de notre Assemblée qui a été prise à de nombreuses reprises. Je pense qu'on ne peut pas, dans un texte comme celui-là, ne pas mentionner le fait de rappeler que l'Assemblée est pour une solution à deux États, pour la fin de l'occupation et la fin de la colonisation qui dure depuis bien trop longtemps pour le peuple palestinien.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? The committee rejected. Excuse me, you have the floor.
I'm against this amendment. If we reward Hamas for its terrorist attack, that you have to reiterate the two-state solutions. Something is wrong in this House. Thank you.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 22 is rejected. I call Mr. Cross to support Amendment 7.
Thank you,
have
Chair.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Chair. This amendment does two things. It delinks the ceasefire from the need to bring humanitarian assistance to Gaza. There shouldn't be any conditionality to humanitarian aid. And second, the ceasefire issue, it harmonizes the language with the European Parliament report that was just passed with big majority last week, and also mentions dismantling of Hamas and release of hostages, which should be the condition of a ceasefire. And it was thankfully supported by a vast majority of the committee. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I call, please, you have the floor. Mr. Cavan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I want to speak against this amendment because let's be absolutely clear what it's saying. It's saying that we're not calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, that we're not calling for an immediate and extended ceasefire. Even as we speak, bombs are raining down on Gaza. How can this Assembly turn its back on that? If we accept this amendment, we give a green light to more violence, more death and more destruction in Gaza. I urge rejection of this amendment.
What is the opinion of the committee?
La Commission a soutenu cet amendement à une grande majorité.
I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 7 is agreed. I call Mr. Selik to support Amendment 14. You have 30 seconds.
There is an inherent obligation to guarantee the safety and the security of journalists and other media workers and to respect and protect them under international law. Attacks by Israel that are in defiance of these responsibilities and that result in the deaths of these personnel should be the subject of criticism and condemnation. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Please, you have the floor.
I want to remind you, when the attack started, there were journalists embedded in these atrocities. They were making propaganda for these bad and terrible cases. And if those journalists get killed, I'm not sorry for them. And you should not say that Israel is not taking care of journalists and news media that are independent. I think their lives matter and Israel is taking care of them, but not for people that are part of the Hamas propaganda. Thank you.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 14 is rejected. I call Mr. Mutka to support Amendment 23. You have 30 seconds.
Madame la Présidente, alors l'amendement veut aussi remettre ici la réalité qu'est l'occupation, la colonisation, et pour répondre, c'est exactement l'inverse d'une récompense au Hamas. C'est de permettre à la communauté internationale de reprendre le lead sur un mot très important, la diplomatie, redonner à la diplomatie un horizon, une perspective pour Israéliens et Palestiniens, pour une paix juste et durable entre les deux. Je vous remercie.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Yes, Mr. Goncharenko, you have the floor.
Dear colleagues, I want to thank Rapporteur for excellent job done. This text is very balanced, and trying to put something inside this text, saying beautiful words, colonization, other words, is making it not better. The great job is done. This is great text, and I just want to ask all of us not to use it just for some political words, and that's all. Thank you very much. I am rejecting this amendment because I don't see what it adds to the text, what we have on the table. Thank you.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 23 is rejected. I call Mr. Selik to support Amendment 15. You have 30 seconds.
Considering the International Court of Justice's role in contributing to global peace and security and upholding the rule of law, and the draft resolutions reference to United Nations Security Council resolutions, it's essential to mention the ongoing judicial process before the United Nations principal judicial organ, Israel being tried before the International Court of Justice for genocide, which is directly relevant to the report. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Please, you have the floor.
I kindly ask you to reject this amendment, and I must say, Mrs. Jelik, what you're saying here always about complaining about Israel, what about Hamas? And what about their responsibility? And where is the international court that will make a trial with Hamas? Why don't you ask for a trial for Hamas? But you support them. Shame on you.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 15 is rejected. I call Mr. Mutka to support Amendment 24. You have 30 seconds.
Merci. Alors, de manière très sereine, pour améliorer notre compréhension du débat, la Cour internationale de justice ne juge que des États, monsieur. C'est pourquoi les terroristes du Hamas, que j'espère un jour voir devant des tribunaux, ne peuvent pas être jugés à cet endroit-là, d'où l'intérêt de l'amendement précédent qui a été rejeté. Ici, cet amendement-ci propose de soutenir psychologiquement les Palestiniens en exil qui sont dans notre pays et qui ont besoin, face à la détresse de voir s'ils voient tous les jours leur famille dans des conditions de souffrance, qui ont besoin d'une aide psychologique, notamment dans les centres pour réfugiés. C'est le cas notamment en Belgique, mais ailleurs, je vous remercie.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 24 is rejected. I call Mr. Mutka to support Amendment 25. You have 30 seconds.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Cet amendement vise à éviter ce qu'on appelle et ce que de nombreuses organisations appellent des crimes de guerre, ce qu'on appelle des crimes de guerre quand on parle d'autres conflits dans le monde, en évitant toute exportation d'armes, bien sûr l'interdiction pour des groupes terroristes comme le Hamas, mais toute exportation d'armes aussi vers Israël qui pourrait amener des violations du droit international. Ça a déjà été le cas. Je pense par exemple à Amnesty ou Human Rights Watch, qui sont des organisations qu'on utilise ici très souvent, qui parlent notamment de bombardements au phosphore blanc contre des populations civiles. C'est malheureusement la réalité.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Lord Blancastre, please, you have the floor.
This is an appalling amendment. Israel is not only under attack from Hamas in Gaza, it's under attack from Hezbollah, from Lebanon, from the Houthis, from Iran. This motion would leave Israel completely defenseless and not able to get weapons to defend its vital defense interests and its own people. It should be rejected.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 25 is rejected. I call Mr. Lux to support Amendment 4. You have 30 seconds.
Frau Präsidentin, meine Damen und Herren! Wenn wir darüber sprechen, dass kein Frieden im Nahen Osten möglich ist, dann sollten wir nicht über das Mullah-Regime im Iran schweigen, das seine eigene Bevölkerung als Geisel nimmt, das die Hamas hochgerüstet und finanziert hat, das mit den Houthis im Jemen strategisch die Region destabilisiert, das erst heute Morgen den 24-jährigen eigenen Staatsbürger Mohammed Gobadlou hingerichtet hat. Dieses Mullah-Regime im Iran braucht eine klare Ansage aus Europa. Es braucht die Listung der iranischen Revolutionsgarden als Terrororganisation nach dem 7. Oktober erst recht.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Mr. Goncharenko, you have the floor.
Actually, I support every word in this amendment except one thing. There is no word about Russia, which also should be condemned and which stands behind this absolutely for sure, and proxy and Hamas is Russian proxy as well as proxy of Iran. So if it's possible to make with an oral sub-amendment, add in Russian Federation, which is acting exactly like Iran in this situation. It's the same axis of evil. Thank you.
What is the opinion of the committee?
La Commission a soutenu cet amendement à une majorité.
I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 4 is agreed. I call Mr. Mutka to support Amendment 26. You have 30 seconds.
Merci, alors ne vous inquiétez pas, c'est presque la dernière fois que vous m'entendez de la soirée, mais je pense que pour faire avancer le processus de paix, il faut réaffirmer l'opposition à la colonisation et notamment l'importation en Europe de produits qui proviennent des colonies. C'est important de faire respecter le droit international de la même manière que je le défends quand c'est des produits de Crimée occupés par l'agresseur russe. Je pense que nous ne pouvons pas supporter financièrement la colonisation qui est vraiment un cancer pour le Moyen-Orient, et je vous appelle à soutenir cet amendement qui propose donc d'interdire notamment les produits des colonies, les voies diplomatiques et économiques pour faire aboutir la paix. Je vous remercie.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment?
Mr. Hare.
You have.
You spoke again of colonization. I must tell you one thing. Ariel Sharon withdrew all settlements out of Gaza. There was not one Israeli citizen left in Gaza. And you know what Hamas did on October 7th? You know what they did? What does this have to do with settlements? Don't twist the truth how it is and reject this nonsense that you are asking in the amendment. Thank you.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 26 is rejected. I call Mr. Mutka to support Amendment 27. You have 30 seconds.
Alors, chers collègues, c'est la dernière fois que je prends la parole ce soir. Je vais vous surprendre, mais je ne vais pas parler de mon amendement puisque je connais le résultat du vote. Je vais vous parler de mon incompréhension et ma honte que j'ai aujourd'hui. Ça fait 3 ans que je suis dans cette assemblée, ça fait 3 ans qu'on défend toutes et tous avec la même conviction des pays qui sont agressés, qu'on défend tous des peuples d'un autre continent qui sont agressés. Et aujourd'hui, alors que le peuple palestinien aussi vit des moments de souffrance, j'ai l'impression qu'on l'oublie, j'ai l'impression que c'est aujourd'hui un phare, celui du Conseil de l'Europe qui s'éteint, et je dois vous dire ma déception et ma tristesse. Voilà, je vous remercie.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment?
Mr. Goncharenko.
Mr. Goncharenko, you have the floor.
Thank you. It's quite, sorry, dear colleague, but it's quite strange amendment because how we can destroy the ties, economic ties, with some settlements which somebody will decide that they are illegal. I mean, it sounds strange, it's impossible to do. And in general, we have the situation when Hamas terrorists are receiving money in cryptocurrency from Iran, from Russia, without any economic ties, receive weaponry from them. And that's the main problem. And we need to deal with the main problem that we have. We need to deal with the actors which try to blow up this world, because they want as much chaos in the world as possible. This is Iran, this is Russia, this is Northern Korea, and all these axes of evil. So don't put blame on some other sides. Thank you.
The committee rejected the amendment by a two-thirds majority. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 27 is rejected. I call Mr. Lux to support Amendment 5. You have 30 seconds.
Frau Präsidentin, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, ich habe Verständnis für alle Menschen, die für die Sache und die Menschenrechte der PalästinenserInnen auf die Straße gehen und demonstrieren. Aber ich habe kein Verständnis, wenn vor der Synagoge in meiner Nachbarstadt Gelsenkirchen gerufen wird, Tod allen Juden. Und ich habe kein Verständnis, wenn jüdische Studierende aus Hörsälen rausgemobbt werden. Dann ist für mich eine Grenze der Meinungsfreiheit erreicht, und zwar ganz besonders in Deutschland, im Land der Shoah. Und dann erwarte ich von meinen Sicherheitskräften, dass sie eingreifen und dass sie diesen kriminellen Antisemitismus stoppen. Und deshalb bitte ich um Ihre Unterstützung für diesen Änderungsantrag.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? What is the opinion of the committee?
La Commission a soutenu cet amendement à une grande majorité, Madame la Présidente.
I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. Amendment 5 is agreed. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15890 as amended. A simple majority is required. The vote is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 15890 as amended is adopted.
Good evening. Next item on the agenda is the debate on the report titled "The Theme of Migration and Asylum in Election Campaigns and the Consequences of the Welcoming and Rights of Migrants," document 15832, presented by Mr. Pierre-Alain Fridet on behalf of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons, with an opinion presented by Mr. Sam Seidov on behalf of the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy, document 15888. In order to finish by 8 p.m., I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 7:45 to allow time for the reply and vote on the draft resolution. I call Mr. Fridet, rapporteur. You have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues, le thème de la migration et de l'asile s'impose de plus en plus comme l'un des éléments clés dans de nombreuses campagnes électorales. La surenchère des mesures restrictives se mue de plus en plus en un véritable engrenage générateur de propos, souvent à la limite des discours de haine ou discriminatoires envers les personnes étrangères.
Mr. Frieda, just 1 second, please. Who's not listening to the debate, please be silent, please. Sorry, because Mr. Frieda is speaking. Thank you, Mr. Frieda.
Merci. Donc je disais que la surenchère des mesures restrictives se mue de plus en plus en un véritable engrenage générateur de propos, souvent à la limite des discours de haine ou discriminatoires envers les personnes étrangères, quel que soit le bord politique. Le phénomène n'est pas nouveau, mais s'intensifie et cela doit nous inquiéter. La manière dont le thème de la migration et l'asile est traité durant les campagnes électorales a des conséquences négatives sur les personnes concernées et sur celles et ceux qui défendent leurs droits. Qu'elles se traduisent ou non en décisions politiques, elles induisent une méfiance.
Colleagues, please, we need silence, please. We need silence in the room, please.
Qu'elles se traduisent ou non en décisions politiques, elles induisent une méfiance et une banalisation des préjugés envers les personnes étrangères ou perçues comme telles. Elles justifient des mesures qui restreignent l'accès aux droits, sans d'ailleurs que cela constitue une réponse aux problèmes de société qui semblaient justifier de telles propositions. Cette tendance inquiète les organes du Conseil de l'Europe, de la commissaire aux droits de l'homme à la Commission européenne contre le racisme et l'intolérance. De même que le réseau Equinet, qui regroupe 46 institutions nationales des droits humains en Europe et a publié en 2019 déjà une recommandation pour combattre la discrimination et les discours de haine durant les campagnes électorales. Nous en sommes là, et tous les pays du Conseil sont concernés. S'agit-il d'un essoufflement démocratique? Nos partis politiques ne sont-ils plus capables de penser les sujets de société sans y affubler un coefficient migratoire comme source de tous les maux? Cela n'est pas une fatalité. L'objectif du projet de résolution que j'ai l'honneur de vous présenter aujourd'hui propose des éléments concrets pour aborder ce grand défi posé à nos démocraties. Je remercie à ce titre M. Gandjaliev et les membres de la Commission des questions politiques et de la démocratie pour leur avis fort utile sur ce dossier et les propositions d'amendements soumises. Ce projet de résolution fait la part belle aux organes du Conseil de l'Europe et à ses programmes pour accompagner les partis politiques et les différents niveaux de gouvernance dans la lutte et la prévention contre les discours de haine. Ces outils existent et je propose de les promouvoir largement. Je veux parler de la recommandation de 2022 du Comité des ministres pour lutter contre les discours de haine. Je veux parler de la charte des partis politiques pour une société non raciste et inclusive que j'appelle instamment les partis politiques à promouvoir et à signer. Je veux parler de la résolution de cette Assemblée concernant le code de bonne conduite des partis politiques ainsi que de l'Alliance parlementaire contre la haine de l'APCE que je vous invite à rejoindre si vous le souhaitez. Le projet de résolution propose également d'aller plus loin pour lutter contre les discours de haine, fussent-ils subtils, durant les campagnes électorales. Les cadres juridiques sont encore trop hétérogènes en Europe, alors que cette réalité touche tous les États membres. Il faut soutenir et accompagner la mise en place de cadres juridiques forts qui permettent de condamner les discours de haine et d'accompagner les victimes. J'ai également réfléchi à des mécanismes qui, tout en respectant la liberté d'expression, permettrait d'apposer des garde-fous contre les discours de haine durant le temps des campagnes électorales, voire en amont. Par exemple, en faisant en sorte que les administrations électorales soient reconnues comme des organes de veille et puissent saisir les autorités compétentes en cas de propos haineux tenus par un candidat ou une candidate durant une campagne électorale. Le deuxième versant de proposition vise à accompagner les sociétés européennes pour débattre sereinement, non seulement à propos, mais aussi avec les personnes migrantes. Il s'agit aussi de repenser la manière d'élaborer un programme, une pensée, éventuellement une vision politique sur la migration et l'asile. Des propositions sont donc faites pour accompagner un traitement de ce thème dans toute sa diversité, au prisme des différents enjeux qu'il recouvre. Je parle ici de tenir compte des analyses et remontées de pratiques émanant des organisations de la société civile et des universitaires, par exemple. Je parle aussi de la manière dont les médias influent sur la couverture de cette thématique. Le Conseil de déontologie journalistique belge parle de clause de conscience médiatique, formule que je trouve pertinente et reprend dans le projet de résolution. Enfin, il me semble utile de réfléchir à une meilleure représentativité des personnes migrantes, réfugiées et demandeuses d'asile, pour que les politiques qui les concernent puissent également intégrer leur voix. Ces personnes pourraient ainsi contribuer à la nomination des leaderships actifs dans les campagnes électorales et qui parlent d'elles, mais souvent sans elles et sans connaître leur réalité. Chers collègues, l'année 2024 va être marquée par un nombre important de scrutins en Europe. Le but de ce rapport n'est pas de nier qu'il puisse y avoir matière à débat sur ces questions migratoires et d'asile. Il ne s'agit pas non plus de contraindre la liberté d'expression ou le pluralisme des propositions politiques en la matière, bien au contraire. Réguler la liberté d'expression ne va pas sans risque et nous devons rester vigilants à ce que certaines législations n'aboutissent pas à sanctionner les voix d'opposition. Mais la liberté d'expression n'est pas un absolu et la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme a souvent rappelé qu'elle pouvait et devait être encadrée pour garantir le respect des autres droits inscrits dans la Convention. Soyons clairs, si les propos critiques, voire opposés aux politiques migratoires et d'asile peuvent s'exprimer en démocratie, les discours de haine et les mesures discriminatoires ne peuvent constituer un programme politique respectueux des principes et des normes du Conseil de l'Europe. Je tiens également à clarifier que défendre le droit à un accueil digne et des conditions d'intégration dignes des personnes migrantes comme horizon politique, ce n'est pas nier le droit aux ressortissants nationaux d'accéder à des conditions de vie et d'emploi dignes. On ne peut ouvrir les frontières de nos pays pour soulager et protéger celles et ceux qui en ont besoin et dans le même temps oublier les difficultés que rencontrent nos propres ressortissants. L'universalité des droits n'est pas un vœu pieux ni un principe vide de sens. Cela réclame des ressources, une vision politique des instruments. Chers collègues, ce qui est en train de se produire en Europe ne peut pas nous laisser indifférents. Ce qui se passe, c'est que nombre de mesures promues durant certaines campagnes électorales et parfois même dans certains projets de loi ne sont pas légales. Cela est confirmé par de nombreux jugements et décisions, y compris de la part de la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme. Or, qu'entendons-nous en réponse à ces décisions de justice? Que les juges seraient des empêcheurs de gouverner en rond, voire, si je puis me permettre, de discriminer en rond. Que les jugements de la Cour européenne peuvent être ignorés. Que l'état de droit n'est pas légitime. Je pose la question, de quelle proposition s'agit-il lorsque, dans un programme électoral, il est assumé que l'architecture européenne de la défense des droits, qui a permis la réalisation de la paix, de la démocratie et de l'état de droit, n'a finalement aucune légitimité? De quel projet politique parle-t-on vraiment lorsqu'on banalise la discrimination comme ligne directrice d'une société? Face aux dangers que cette tendance représente, il est impératif de penser non seulement le temps juridique, mais aussi le temps électoral. Cet enjeu nous engage tous et convoque fortement la responsabilité des partis politiques, de tous les partis politiques. La déclaration de Reykjavik, adoptée lors du 4e sommet, pointe les discours de haine comme l'une des menaces à la démocratie et à l'état de droit. Cette affirmation me semble ici pleine de sens et je vous demande de soutenir ce projet de résolution. Je vous remercie pour votre écoute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Friede. Now I call Mr. Zingris to present his opinion. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Zingris.
Merci, chers collègues. So, thank you, dear friends. Today I would like to present my opinion, who actually should be presented by Mr. Ganialiev on behalf of the Committee on Political Affairs. But unfortunately, Mr. Ganialiev could not attend our session today. I'm like a vice president presenting his opinion like a rapporteur for opinion. The report prepared by the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons focused on the exploitation and manipulation of that theme of migration and asylum during the usual electoral campaigns in Europe, so which can lead to normalization of xenophobic discourse, cementing this discourse, and subsequently to discrimination, erosion of access to rights, and even violent acts towards migrants and refugees. This is related to the debates around freedom of expression, the behaviors of politicians during and after a political campaign, and the role of the media. The draft resolution provides a description of the different instruments of the Council of Europe addressing those dimensions and how to capitalize and strengthen them. This is a matter that the Parliamentary Assembly already tackled on the different occasions in the past, and I will also link to the report that I prepared on this mean my colleague Ganielov prepared on behalf of the committee, the challenge of the far-right ideology to democracy and human rights in Europe, which, as you recall, was adopted during the plenary session of October, and in which we analyzed the risk related to far-right ideology for European societies and articulated relevant recommendations. So the draft opinion prepared by Mr. Galiev agrees with the analysis and findings contained to the report of Mr. Friedrich and support the draft resolution proposing 4 amendments in order to strengthen its message. So I'm glad to know that the reporting committee agrees to accept all those amendments. The first amendment introduces a paragraph in the draft resolution urging member states to strengthen their actions to protect their political debates against foreign interference and manipulation, in particular when it comes to spreading hatred and xenophobic discourse. The draft opinion also focused on the challenge posed by only propaganda and dissemination of fake news. In the line with this, it includes an amendment that stresses the role of social media platforms in blocking the dissemination of hate speech content while safeguarding freedom of expression. Another 2 amendments focus on strengthening the role that its Parliamentary Assembly can play, participating in regular consultations between the Congress Steering Committee on Anti-Discrimination, Diversity and Inclusion and the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, and the NGO conference, and also through the election of observation missions which could consider monitoring and reporting on the presence of hate speeches and those elements during the electoral campaign in the observed countries. In the small but significant amendments, the draft resolution will be included in even stronger. In order to tackle the manipulation on the theme for migration and allow in turn the conduct of democratic, fair and respectful debates during electoral campaigns. Once again,
please, Mr. Zingris,
I am grateful to the Committee on Migration for having agreed to all 4 amendments. And from my side, I would like to congratulate all people who worked on this very important report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Zingris. Now we go to the speaker list, and I call first Mr. Lord Richard Keane. The floor is yours.
Mr. President, members of the Assembly, I fear that too often speakers conflate the issue of refugees and asylum on the one hand and the separate and distinct issue of immigrants and migration. As we know, asylum in international law is the protection granted by a state to a foreign citizen threatened by persecution in their own state or faced by exceptional danger in their own state. Such a person can properly be referred to as a refugee. Thus, Article 1 of the UN Refugee Convention refers to a person who has a well-founded fear of persecution. By contrast with the foregoing, Migration is the movement of people from one country to another with the intention of permanent settlement. An immigrant is a foreign citizen who, for what are generally economic or social reasons, seeks permanent settlement in someone else's country. Members of the Council of Europe and their populations respect and are generally responsive to the obligation of asylum that is owed to genuine refugees. A far greater challenge is prompted by the political, social, and economic consequences of mass migration. Such consequences may be greatly mitigated where a state is able to control legal migration and thereby explain to its citizens who is being allowed into their country and why they are being allowed in. However, these consequences are greatly exacerbated where a state is not able to control unlawful migration and cannot then explain to its own citizens who has entered their country and what they are doing there. It is this latter situation that is bound to give rise to political and social tensions, which can create extreme reactions to immigration. It is then that the issue of migration becomes a divisive electoral and political issue. We should expect the citizens of a state to welcome and respect the rights of foreign citizens who've lawfully entered their country. But we cannot reasonably expect the citizens of any state to welcome the political, social, and economic dislocation that is the consequence of uncontrolled mass migration. Any attempt to do so would simply deny the lessons of history. In the 80 years up to 1910, about 45 million people migrated from Europe to the Americas and Australasia. A superficial view of history would tell you that such mass migration was a huge political, social, and economic success. Well, it was for the immigrants. But pause for a moment to remind yourself of the impact of that mass migration on the peoples and societies that already existed in those continents. For them, the impact of such uncontrolled mass migration was devastating and destructive. Members of the Assembly, we ignore the lessons of history at our peril.
Please, Lord. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Now the floor goes to Mrs. Elena Bonetti.
Dear President, dear colleagues, I am really honored to speak on behalf of the ALDE Group. The topic we are discussing is of particular interest as it is at the intersection of freedom of opinion, in particular political opinion, and respect for the values which define the Council of Europe. We support the resolution. In election campaigns, the themes of migrants and asylum are often at the core of a public narrative, inducing and amplifying hate speech, discrimination, and intolerance. The consequence is the reinforcing of populist theories, which undermine the principles of European solidarity and respect for fundamental human rights. There is also evidence that public debate on migrants and asylum for refugees may be manipulated by foreign countries to influence public opinion and voting within individual states. Such actions represent threats to our democracy. This means that, particularly during election campaigns, we must promote a democratic dialogue among different opinions in order to build a shared agenda. Only by doing this can we achieve meaningful and lasting well-being for society and individuals. Our dialogue cannot limit the theme of migration and asylum to security matters, but must also include social cohesion. At the same time, we must unequivocally condemn any form of hate speech and discriminatory measures, which have no place in a political program coherent with our European values. It is therefore essential that European political parties endorse the Charter for a non-racist and inclusive society, and that Member States provide effective national mechanisms for reporting and taking action against hate speech. However, it is also clear that if we want to implement effective policies to tackle the issue of migration, we must avoid demagogic and simplistic arguments. Indeed, we must use arguments that people can understand as relevant to their everyday life. Either Europe must start to tackle the migration issue in the broader context of demographic transition, or we will not be able to take the lead in strengthening our role, the role of European democracy in the international context and in a peace-building scenario. We need to directly address these issues in our policies regarding the labor market, education and welfare. Dear colleagues, this is our responsibility to empower Europe in facing the new challenges ahead, to build a better society guaranteeing universal human rights to citizens across Europe and all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bonetti. Now the floor goes to George Lokaides. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dear colleagues, dear rapporteur, I wish to thank Mr. Fidesz for his diligent work on this important matter. As the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has recognized, the themes of migration and asylum have been frequently subjected to distortion and manipulation. The surge of far-right groups and xenophobic discourse, as well as the rise and normalization of discriminatory policies during election campaigns, are particularly alarming. Such tactics trivialize the humanitarian issue of migrants and asylum seekers, but also perpetuate an environment that fosters hate and leads to verbal, psychological, and physical violence against them. PACE should be alarmed that conservative voices are eager to divert public opinion and gain votes and visibility by blaming those who have no political voice, migrants and refugees. We as parliamentarians must stand up for the human faces behind numbers and statistics. It is our responsibility to ensure that electoral processes do not compromise the fundamental rights of those seeking refuge or a better life, nor the rights of the voters by protecting their right to participate in free and fair elections based on an equitable electoral campaign environment. Political parties must condemn and sanction the use of hate speech by their members, including the pre-electoral campaigns. The revised Charter of European Political Parties for a Non-Racist and Inclusive Society, adopted in 2022, is an important instrument in our collective pursuit of a just and inclusive society. Member States should develop codes of conduct regulating the political programme and electoral candidates and media coverage, with guidelines that emphasise the importance of promoting inclusive policies and refrain from engaging in hate speech or discriminatory rhetoric. Guidelines should also be developed on responsible reporting and fact-checking to avoid sensationalism, xenophobia and discrimination against migrants and asylum seekers. By promoting ethical journalism and ensuring that debates and opinions remain respectful, informed and devoid of harmful narratives, Member States will remain committed to upholding the principles of freedom of expression, electoral activism, diversity and engagement in line with the Venice Commission's Code of Good Practices in Electoral Matters. Dear colleagues, granting migrants the opportunity to engage in political processes through party membership is another powerful way to recognise and integrate their voices into our societies and acknowledge their valuable contributions, while empowering them to actively shape the political landscape that directly affects their lives also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now it's up to Mrs. Marietta Cara-Lamanle. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Il est difficile, effectivement, d'aborder, chers collègues, Monsieur le rapporteur, ce sujet, tant il est animé. Animé pour certains acteurs politiques par une volonté opportuniste d'imputer la responsabilité de différents malheurs à ceux qui sont souvent perçus comme différents. Mais il est aussi animé pour bien d'autres, mus par la peur et la hantise de déclassement considéré comme allant de soi. Monsieur le rapporteur a essayé ici, mes chers collègues, de cerner les facteurs qui favorisent les discours discriminants et les règles qui pourraient limiter ces propos. Il valorise la responsabilité des médias, celle des partis politiques qui, sans nier les difficultés, tiennent un discours relatif, réaliste, positif, relativiste et historique. Celle des citoyens et associations aussi qui bâtissent l'intégration. Mais le mal est, ne le cachons pas, profond. Il est en effet une part stable de la population des différents États qui s'inquiètent de l'immigration vers des pays européens. En France, cette part a augmenté, même si on peut considérer qu'un quart ou un tiers est franchement opposé aux migrants et réfugiés, l'inquiétude diffuse, je dirais, dépassant largement cette première strate. Cette inquiétude ne peut malheureusement être combattue par des arguments scientifiques, par des faits établis par des sciences économiques et sociales. Elle n'est pas de cet ordre, mais se situe, je dirais, sur le terrain de la peur du changement, de l'angoisse de ne pas y arriver dans un monde où les inégalités se sont creusées au sein même de pays développés. Selon de nombreux collègues ici, dans nos parlements nationaux, il nous faut renouer avec des politiques globales, des politiques qui assurent une meilleure redistribution de la richesse en direction des populations ayant des faibles ressources économiques, culturelles et politiques, mais aussi des politiques qui embarquent, je dirais, avec elles l'ensemble des populations immigrées, récentes ou moins récentes, et dont les effets positifs pour tous seront justement à même de jouer favorablement pour ceux ayant le plus de difficultés, sans effet stigmatisant pour elles et sans sentiment d'exclusion, justement, à rebours pour les autres. Cette renvoie à l'idée que les politiques d'intégration se jouent au niveau de chaque État et doivent aussi articuler également des politiques publiques transversales à travers le travail, le logement, l'éducation, mais aussi la culture. Alors ici, au nom du groupe socialiste, démocrates et verts, je souhaite vraiment porter tout notre soutien à ce rapport qui a été présenté par notre collègue, qui est très complet, qui donne des pistes, que nous souhaitons aussi que ça puisse être aussi une piste à suivre, non seulement au sein du Conseil de l'Europe, mais sur l'ensemble des États membres de ce Conseil. Merci de votre attention.
Thank you very much, Madame Caramanli. Now the floor goes to Mrs. Jasko. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, after the last debate, have you felt the temperature in this House? Have you seen how much the discussion and debate is polarized? And how scary it is that we have so many wars, we have so many tragedies in so many parts of the world, but we simply sometimes cannot find the human language to talk about the real tragedies and use the language of human rights to find the solutions. In this report for me is not a report about migration. It's a test of our commitment to protecting democracy and human rights for the future. And when we talk about migration, I often ask, why, with so much hatred, with such a strange narrative in the media, somehow the question of migration became a negative narrative? Why migrants are often treated as disadvantaged or with some negative context? While in fact, if you look at the economy and the real data that migrants contribute to the economies of so many countries. But the problem starts is when politicians don't answer the needs of those who need to be heard, and when very extremist parties weaponize this question, and it becomes incredibly polarized. And in the end, how does it help? Does it help the migrants? Does it help that societies? Does it help the country to be an international community in peace? Unfortunately, it doesn't. I really want to ask you to think about the policies that will allow all of this, together with, mentioned by the rapporteur, the certain tools in regulations in the media, to decrease the hatred on the question of migration, and to look with the honesty, where are the migrants who are contributing to the economy, who are hardworking, and what rights do they need? Many of them need the rights to the education. Many of them need the rights to access the political life. They should be granted if they are hardworking. But if these people are, of course, committing crimes, then there should be responsibility and justice for that. But let's try to remove this negative narrative of migration. It's not going to help us in the future if we want to have less wars and if we want to have peace. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Jasko. Now, I must now interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members of the speaker list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that typewritten text must be submitted electronically, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. I call now Mr. Fridet, rapporteur, to reply to the debate. You have 3 minutes. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais en fait débuter mon intervention finale en remerciant Madame Marie Martin du secrétariat de la Commission pour son travail vraiment très important. Elle a été vraiment d'une aide précieuse. J'ai 2 remarques à faire par rapport au débat qui vient d'avoir lieu. Tout d'abord, il y a eu l'intervention de M. Keane, qui en fait a fait un tour, enfin, il a exprimé quelque part beaucoup de choses que tous les gens utilisent, mais en fait, avec peut-être une logique qui, moi, me paraît fausse et que je vais essayer de démontrer. Donc l'idée, c'est qu'on parle de vrais réfugiés, puis de faux réfugiés. On parle de mouvements migratoires de masse, on parle d'immigration légale. Tout ça, c'est un tableau un peu simpliste. Il y a dans notre monde maintenant énormément de misère, énormément de guerre, énormément de violence. Et en fait, des gens cherchent à un moment donné un endroit où vivre. Alors, il est clair que le terme d'immigration légale, dans la logique de la CEDH, n'existe pas. Une immigration, elle est régulière ou irrégulière. Moi, je suis suisse, j'ai un passeport diplomatique, je pense que je peux aller à peu près partout. Il y a d'autres gens qui n'ont pas cette possibilité. Ils doivent trouver un moyen, à un moment donné, de trouver une solution pour eux, pour leur famille, pour leur avenir. Et en fait, tout ça, c'est quelque chose qui est compliqué, qui n'est pas simple. Ça concerne de plus en plus de monde parce que notre monde va de plus en plus mal. Et en fait, c'est devenu, c'est vrai, un fonds de commerce pour des gens, des partis qui surfent sur la peur et qui, en fait, expriment ces craintes. Et cela crée un écho dans nos populations, surtout chez les personnes qui se sentent un petit peu larguées face à la globalisation, face aux problèmes économiques et sociaux. Et pour moi, ce qui est important, c'est que nous ne devons jamais oublier le sort des gens qui vivent chez nous, qui ont des difficultés, parce que si on veut accueillir des migrants, il faut aussi que les gens chez nous soient dans une situation favorable et correcte. Et le deuxième discours qui m'a un peu nettement plus plu, c'était celui de Mme Jasko, qui en fait parle de la migration en termes positifs, parce que c'est vrai que la migration, ce n'est pas que des problèmes, ce n'est pas soi-disant que des problèmes de sécurité. Non, c'est des gens qui viennent, qui veulent travailler. Et nous, en Europe, on a une population qui vieillit, on a besoin de cette migration. Et ces thèmes-là, dans le discours politique, est très peu utilisé, alors que c'est la chose fondamentale. Et on connaît tous des migrants, en Suisse, il y en a beaucoup, qui sont des gens totalement intégrés. Et la grande majorité des migrants sont des gens honnêtes qui veulent simplement trouver un endroit où vivre. Et j'aimerais rappeler à M. Keane, il a parlé des USA, et en fait les USA auraient vécu une situation compliquée par rapport à l'immigration, Peut-être, en tout cas pour les Indiens d'Amérique, ce n'était pas tout simple, mais ce qui est certain, c'est que les émigrés, ils venaient de chez nous, ils venaient d'Europe. Et à un moment donné, nos populations à nous ont voulu trouver un espoir, un Eldorado ailleurs, et c'est quelque chose de tout à fait humain. Donc Europe forteresse, pour moi pas. Europe démocratique, oui. Écoute de la difficulté des gens, mais trouver des solutions dans le respect des êtres humains, dans le respect de la CEDH, est quelque chose pour moi de tout à fait essentiel.
Thank you, Mr. Fride. Does the chair of the committee, Mr. Goncharenko, wish to speak? Yes, he does. So, Mr. Goncharenko, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. I think that this is extremely timely report, because the topic of migration today, at the moment when the whole world is entering the most democratic year in the history of humankind, more than 2 billion people in the world will vote this year and will vote for their democratically elected governments. And that is unbelievable, and there will be elections throughout the whole European Union and many member states of Council of Europe. And I think that the topic of migration, asylum, and which is covered by committee, which I have an honor, and I thank my colleagues for the possibility to chair this committee, this is extremely important today. And we need to speak about this. From one point of view, we can't put a blind eye on the problem that when we're saying that we can't discuss migration at all, it's not true. Migration is discussed, will be discussed, there will be debates about this in all countries, and it is absolutely normal. But at the same time, we need not to be on extreme positions, and it shouldn't be debates with a hatred speech, with the dehumanizing people. That's very important. Asylum seekers, there are real asylum seekers who are just saving their lives, and we are human beings. We can't reject them in this. But there are those who are trying to justify their sometimes illegal actions by looking for asylum. This is a completely different story. There are ruthless gangs which are using people, which are smuggling live people, human beings, in order to earn money, very dirty money, and we need to fight with this. And this is very important. And these are big differences we need to say about this. Yeah, migration can cause a huge economic impact, positive economic impact, but migration can cause a huge crises and divisions inside societies and conflicts inside societies. That is all possible. So our way, what we should do, we believe in democracy and we believe in human rights and we believe in the rule of law in this assembly. And based on these values, we can build the right way where we respect the human rights, also the respect of human being to save its life, to watch for a better life for this human being and its children. That is normal, absolutely normal. But at the same time, the right of people to secure their culture and to know with whom they are living with, this is absolutely normal too. We need to protect their law, and we need to protect democracy. And democracy gives us the way how to do this. It's an open dialogue. It's a speaking with people, it's different positions, it's debates, acute debates, but never hate speech, never hatred. That is very important. And don't forget that today migration also became one of the points of a hybrid war. Just remember Lukashenko puppet regime attacking Polish and Lithuanian borders, with the human beings being used as a weapon. I'm finishing.
Can you finish?
And what now is doing Putin's regime on the border with Finland. So we need to deal with this, we need to speak about this, and I want to thank Rapporteur for excellent job done. I want to thank Secretariat, and I think this is a very timely report.
Thank you, Mr. Goncharenko. Thank you. The debate is closed. The Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons has presented a draft resolution, document 15832, to which 4 amendments have been tabled by the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy. I understand that the chair of the Committee on Migration, Refugees and Displaced Persons wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 1, 2, and 3 to the draft resolution, document 15832, which were unanimously approved by the committee, should be declared as agreed by the Assembly. Is that so, Mr. Goncharenko?
Yes, absolutely.
Does anyone object? If so, please ask for the floor by raising your hand. No, nobody does. As there is no objection, I declare that Amendment 1, 2, and 3 to the draft resolution have been agreed. Does anyone wish to speak to support Amendment 4?
No, we'll just move on. So Amendment 4 falls.
Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? No.
Amendment 4 is not moved. So next page.
What I have. We will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15832 as amended. There's no amendment. A simple majority is required.
One moment.
Just 1 second. Yeah, please.
The Chair, is Amendment 4 not going to be voted on then, or has it been accepted? I didn't understand the point you made then.
Nobody move it, so it falls. It falls.
Am I too late to move it?
Yeah, definitely too late. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, the vote is now open. I call for the result to be displayed. So,
The vote is closed.
the vote is closed.
Agreed. The draft resolution.
The draft resolution is adopted.
Dear colleagues, I have the honor to announce the results on the election of the Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights. The total number of members voting was 254. The number of spoiled or blank ballot papers is 4. The number of valid votes is 250. Absolute majority of the vote cast, 126 votes. The votes were cast as follows. Mrs. Meglena Kuneva from Bulgaria, 78 votes. Mr. Manfred Novak from Austria, 75 votes. Mr. Michael Flaherty from Ireland, 97 votes. No candidate having obtained an absolute majority of votes cast. A second round will take place tomorrow afternoon from 2:30 p.m. to 8 p.m.
6 p.m.
To 6 p.m. I repeat, a second round will take place tomorrow afternoon from 2:30 p.m. to 6 p.m. 2:30 p.m. to 6 p.m.
All three. All three candidates.
All 3 candidates again. Yes, dear Emanuelis, just for you I'll do it. Mrs. Meglena Kuneva, 78, Mr. Manfred Novak, 75, and Mr. Michael Flaherty, 97. So now I'm going to announce the results for the election of a judge to the European Court of Human Rights for Bulgaria. Total number of members voting 253, number of spoiled or blank ballot paper 12, number of valid votes 241. Absolute majority of the votes cast 121. The votes were cast as follows. Mrs. Diana Petrova Kovacheva 120. Mrs. Galia Valkova 104. Mr. Dragomir Yordanov, 17. Since no candidate having obtained an absolute majority of votes, a second round will take place tomorrow, the same time, between 2:30 p.m. and 8 p.m. I will announce now the results of the election of a judge to the European Court of Human Rights for Lithuania. Emanuelis. Total number of members voting, 253. Number of spoiled or blank ballot papers, 12. Number of valid votes, 241. Absolute majority of the votes cast, 122. And the votes were cast as follows. Mrs. Lira Yakulevitsiene, 81. Mr. Gediminas Sagatis, 140. Mrs. Edita Ziobiene, 20. So, Mr. Sagatis, having obtained an absolute majority of votes cast, is elected judge of the European Court of Human Rights for a term of office of 9 years, which shall commence no later than 3 months after his election. We wish him all the best. And now I will announce the results of the election of a judge to the European Court of Human Rights for Luxembourg. Total number of members voting, 253. Number of spoiled or blank ballot papers, 16. Number of valid votes, 237. 237. Absolute majority of the votes cast, 120. The votes were cast as follows. Mr. Jog Gerkrath, 24. Mrs. Marie-Jeanne Kapweiler, 35. Mr. Stefan Pisani, 178. So Mr. Pisani, having obtained an absolute majority of votes cast, is elected judge of the European Court of Human Rights for a term of office of 9 years, which shall commence no later than 3 months after his election. We wish him all the best. I now give the floor to Emmanuel Fernandez for a personal statement.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Simplement, par rapport à la résolution précédente sur les développements récents au Moyen-Orient, je veux simplement spécifier que pour l'amendement numéro 2, j'aurais souhaité m'abstenir. Il y a une erreur de vote. Voilà. Donc c'est l'abstention sur l'amendement numéro 2. Merci.
Okay, thank you. So, dear colleagues, the Assembly will hold its next public sitting tomorrow afternoon at 2:30 p.m. with the agenda which was approved on Monday. I invite you to be in the hemicycle at your seats in good time for the address for Mr. Daniel Rhys, Prime Minister of Liechtenstein, at 2:30 p.m. The sitting is adjourned. Thank you so much.